great pleasure to be here, and I'd like to welcome everybody who's taken the time to join us. What I'm hoping to do today is maybe reframe your ideas around the concept of selling and sales, take some of the fear, some of the concerns, some of the stress out of that, and then teach you some specific techniques that will be very helpful for you when it comes to working with and influencing clients as you go forward in the new post-COVID era. So as we go into the new environment, we're going to be working what we call a blended sales environment, which means that some of your sales will go back to going face-to-face, but some of it will now start to go online. So you'll start to engage with people more in the digital space in that respect. And I'm sure many of you are making plans to do that with your businesses at the present time. Whatever platform you find yourself operating in, whether it's face-to-face or whether it's in a digital platform like this, the fundamental elements of that are twofold. One, everything is about how we can be of service to the people that we work with. And two, everything is now coming to how well you can influence and engage with people. So in the past, where expertise was important, and many of you would have started your businesses because you were experts in given areas. You were technically expert or very good at crafts or very good at being a professional, for example, an accountant or a lawyer or whatever, and you started your business because of that expertise. It's going to become less important going forward. Because what we're dealing with in the modern world is we're dealing with the rise of artificial intelligence. We're dealing with the rise of going digital as we are now. And what's happening is all that expertise area, all that skills area is going to fall into an area where AI and technology and automation and digital work will replace a lot of that. So what does that mean? Well, then there's another context we need to spend more attention to, and that is the emotional context. That's the influencing the level of high trust that we can build with people. Because the one thing about AI and about technology as it evolves is that while it's great, it doesn't have emotion, and it doesn't have imagination, and it doesn't unlock innovation, and it doesn't unlock creativity. And all of those things, we have an edge on it for now. So it's the same in sales as it would be in leadership. It's how we make the most of those things and how we apply them that will determine our success as we go forward and our longevity as we go forward in the fields of sales or in the fields of leadership. Because effectively, whether you're managing a business with a team or whether you're selling a business, it's the same thing. It's just two sides of the same coin. And I hope to make that a little clearer as we go through the process. So what I'll do to start with now is let's just share the screen and look at what we're going to be addressing as we go through the process. So let's deal with this concept of stop hesitating about selling and getting out there and actually doing selling in the first place. So the first thing I want to start with is I want to start with a little poll, and we'll throw that up. And what I'm really interested in finding out at the moment is how many of you are offering a product and how many of you are offering a service. So we get a perspective on that will be really helpful to see where the industry is and where the focus is at the present time. That's very interesting. So predominantly we are service oriented, which is very much of a people engagement. But that said, being a product as well, because ultimately all and everything we do about selling is about being of service. So let's just explore that maybe a little bit as we move the process forward. So we just share those results. Everybody can see those. So product, we're looking at about 33%, and service, we're looking at 67%. So twice as many people in the field of service as they are in the field of product. But let me deal with that piece. We'll just close that off. Okay, and we're good with that aspect. So the first question is to think about selling, is that selling, I often call it an accidental profession. Now, what do we mean by an accidental profession? The reality is, whether you're a professional salesperson or business developer, or you're an SME owner, none of us ever planned when we were 7 years old to be a salesperson. We did not wake up one day when we were 7 and say, I want to be a salesperson. And even if you did, I'm pretty sure your parents tried to dissuade you from that concept. And the reason they tried to dissuade you from the idea of being a salesperson is that the concept of selling has always been about high pressure, strongly pitching, manipulative, over pressurized, stressful based approach to what we do to people. And it also came with the concept of low status. So the idea of being a salesperson was never really considered to be the same status as maybe a professional or an engineer or a lawyer or whatever the case may be. So this idea of selling, there's a very negative resonance about selling even today in the current marketplace and how we perceive it. So I call it an accidental profession. However, when you've been in business for any length of time, you begin to realize that nothing happens without a sale. So it doesn't matter how good your product is. It doesn't matter how good your service is. It doesn't matter how strong your message is. If you can't get one-to-one and find out what the challenge is for a person, find a way to have a solution for that, and then monetize that solution, you will not have a business, period. Sales is the cutting edge of business. And if you can't make a sale, you can't prosper. So let's look at how we can develop that a little bit further and understand that. So what I want to talk about a little is about the concept of traditional selling versus modern selling. So what is the fundamental difference between selling as it was in the past and where this idea of high pressure, stereotypical concept of selling came from and where modern sales is? So the first thing I would say is way back in the older days when selling was codified, they used to have people called traveling salesmen or commercial travelers. And in many cases, these were very much self-starting individuals, but they were typically given one product to sell, and they were given one region in which to sell it in. And the reality was it was all commission-based. So if they didn't sell, they didn't eat. So you can imagine there was a very strong motivation behind them to make sales and make it happen. So on one side, we had salespeople who were given a product or a service that they had to sell, because if they didn't sell, they wouldn't eat. And on the other side, in most cases, they were selling to people who would have been, say, storekeepers or shopkeepers, who are very different from the driving, assertive, almost aggressive type commercial traveler that was coming through the door. They were much more focused on their business, on retail, and looking after the customers that came in. So you had a very strong individual meeting with an individual who was less pushy and less in your face. So the way they came across, because they had to make a sale, was of necessity high pressure and very strong, almost manipulative techniques. So they used to have different techniques called the half close and the full close. Thankfully, those days are behind us. But the stereotype and the resonance of the stereotype remains. Modern selling is a very different process. And the best way to explain modern selling is to understand that the word selling, that the root word of selling is to be of service to people. Now, I don't think there's anybody on this call today who isn't interested in being of service to their clients. And that's what we're looking to do. We're looking at a situation to find more ways to be of service, to find out what their pain points are, and then to create a solution for that pain point and then monetize that engagement. So the best way to explain it is to understand that fundamentally what selling today is all about is about the idea of being of service to others and finding ways to be of service to others. And to be successful in sales today, then it's really just about finding more people with more pain points that we can resolve and then delivering the solution and monetizing that solution over the longer term. And so modern selling is based on 4 key principles of value. And these 4 key principles of value are how you will always be able to make a sale and align your service or your product to be of value to people. The first principle of value is, can I save you time? Or can I make you time? So the first principle of value is save time or make a person time. Time is a huge commodity for us, and it's something that people want more of, and they want ways of saving time or maximizing the time they already have. So do you have a solution that can do that for them? Can you create a higher level of convenience for them than they might currently have by finding or saving time for them? The second one, which is something everybody's familiar with, is can we find you or save you money? So is it something that I have that will find a way to make you more money in your business, or will it save you money in your business? What service or product do I have that will do that for me? The third element is anything that will solve their problems. The one thing that people are highly motivated to do is solve problems that are causing them pain. In Freudian psychology, he always talked about human beings move away from pain and toward pleasure. So anything that we can take pain away from people and move them to a better spot is something that's of value to them. So that's something you want to think about. What are the challenges your people are facing? What in your market area or in your niche are the real pain points for people? And if you can solve those and demonstrate that you can solve those for those people, they will always want what you're looking for. And the last one, the fourth element of value, is make people feel good. If you can make people feel good by virtue of your service, That is a hugely valuable process. And that leads to the issue of what selling today is all about, which I'll get to in just a few minutes. So the four key principles of value, the ones that clearly differentiate modern sales from the old hardcore high pressure elements of sales is, can I save you time or money? Or sorry, can I save you time? Can I save you money? Can I solve your problems? Or can I make you feel good? If I can do any one of those four, or indeed more than any one of those four, in the solution that I have for someone, you will always gain their attention and it will always be valued. So now we're not pushing anything. Now what we're doing is bringing something that is of service or is of value to people. So if we were to redefine sales for the modern age, let's put a different slant on that. One of the things that we could say is what selling is all about is being able to influence the emotional state of the client so we can influence their logical decisions for the transfer of goods, services, or money for the mutual benefit of both parties. So let's just give you that definition again and we'll break it down again. So selling is the ability to influence the emotional state of a prospect or a client so that you can influence their logical decisions for the transfer of goods, services, or money for the mutual benefit of both parties. So let's break that down. The first thing is that it's fundamentally about your ability to be able to manage the emotional state of a prospect or a client. And this is a key principle in modern selling. The University of Cranfield indicated that 90% of our business decisions are emotionally driven. So that's 90% of our business decisions are emotionally driven. Now think about that for a second, because I'm going to give you a technique that's going to help you with getting attention from clients as we go forward from this particular webinar. So we need to be able to manage the emotional state. If we can manage or influence the emotional state of a prospect or a client, and that's founded in the four key values: save them time, save them money, make them feel good, or solve their problems, then what we will do is we will influence their logical decisions. You see, the reality is when it comes to selling, people buy what they want, not necessarily what they need. I mean, think about it, for example. Have you ever been in a store where you bought something that you knew you could get cheaper somewhere else, but you bought it there anyway? Now, if you've ever had that experience, that's not logical. Why would you spend more money when you knew you could get it cheaper somewhere else? And the chances are that you did it because it was convenient, so it would save you time to do it there. You had a relationship with maybe the person who was serving you in that store or in that business. You had rapport, you had trust with them, you liked them, and you knew they'd take care of you. Or in some other way, it solved the problem that you had. Or it just made you feel good to buy it from there because maybe you trusted the brand rather than the brand that was cheaper somewhere else. So if you look back at a lot of your buying decisions, most of them are driven by emotion. Afterwards, we justify it with logic. Afterwards, we justify it with logic. And this leads to one of the biggest problems that a lot of sales training programs get wrong. They teach you to say the wrong things to your clients when you first engage with them. And I'm going to help you deal with that in just a second. So it's about the ability to influence the emotional state so we can influence their logical decisions for the transfers of goods, services, or money. And here's the key point: for the mutual benefit of both parties. So modern professional selling is about how do we create mutually beneficial relationships. So in other words, how do I win because you, Mr. Client or Mr. Customer or Ms. Prospect, wins? So the whole key to this is, how do I get value out of helping you get what you need to do in your business? Now, the more of that you can do, here's what's going to happen. You will not only get a sale, you will not only maximize the value of a one-off sale, but you will maximize the length of time of the relationship as well. So you'll have what we call long-term client value. You'll have that client not just over one purchase, but over a long period of time, that you monetize that relationship for a much longer period than if you were simply attempting to make a one-off sale. So this concept of mutual engagement, mutual benefit, is really, really critical to how we engage in sales and how we do our work going forward. And there's a very clear difference between a high pressurized type environment to where it's very low pressurized in terms of how we engage with people. So you could say that what we're doing is we're moving from a situation of where we're a salesperson or a sales pitcher. So we're pitching information, we're throwing information out there, to where we're now looking to become a person who is an influencer or an advisor. So in many respects, clients now see us as someone that they would go to if they need advice or engagement around a particular service or product that's going to help them with their business. Now, this is really important, because what it means is that for those of us who want to be successful in selling in the modern world and want to become a long-term perceived value to our clients, we need to move from simply pitching what we have to being able to advise on what we have in terms of its benefit to a client. We need to move along this journey from simply being an expert to being perceived as an influencer. In other words, you become someone who's the first person they call when they have a challenge in that particular area. And there's a very good reason for that. In the old days, in the old model of selling, we brought information to people. So we brought brochures, we brought knowledge, we brought technical specs, we brought information about the product in order to inform people about what we had that could solve their problems. But today, we have Google. You know, the clients have access to websites, multiple websites, they have access to information at their fingertips. In many cases, before they ever engage with you, they've done an extensive amount of research. They already know what they want. So why do they need to talk to us? Well, they need to talk to us for two reasons. One, they want to build a long-term relationship with a potential provider, someone that they like, someone that they trust, someone that they respect. Now, they also want someone who's knowledgeable, but not in the sense that they're going to try and give them information. Our job today is very different. Our job today as sales professionals is to interpret the information that our clients have already gathered in a way that makes it meaningful to their business or solves their business's problems. So let me just talk about that again for a second. So it's no longer about us presenting information. What it is now about is how we interpret information they've already gathered in terms of how they deploy our product or our service to save them time, save them money, solve their problems, or make them feel good. So you effectively become not a pitcher of information, not an expert, but an advisor and an influencer. And that's the journey, and that's the role that we now have. So that's a fundamental shift in the perception of how selling is today. It's fundamentally about service. And the key skills now are not so much your expertise, but how you can not just communicate, but how you can connect with people, how you can involve them, and how you can engage with them. These are really key skills today. Now, I did say I'd share one other element around this, which may change how you communicate with your clients, and it's this. Many of you will be familiar with the concept of unique selling points. So what are our USPs? For those of you who are not familiar with USPs, these unique selling points have traditionally been the messages that we've created by which our business stands out from the competition, supposedly. For those of you who use USPs, you'll realize that in actual fact, the use of the word unique is erroneous for the simple reason that none of these selling points tend to be unique. In fact, there's a good chance that your competitor uses exactly the same unique selling points as you do. And that's why when you get in front of a client to talk to them about what you have to offer, if you're saying the same thing as the other guys they've heard, there's nothing about your message that differentiates what you do. So looking at this, I created a concept called points of compelling relevance. And points of compelling relevance take a different approach to gaining and holding the client's attention. One of the challenges we have in sales today is that we are surrounded by weapons of mass distraction. So we have mobile phones, we have laptops, we have iPads, we have TV, we have all kinds of things that are distracting from the attention span of our clients. Now, despite what some people say, people's attention span are not getting shorter, but what's happening is the level of distraction is getting higher, which means that the attention time that you have to deliver the value of your message has now become significantly shorter, which means that our messages need to become significantly more compelling. So let me share with you how we make that happen. Most unique selling points are very logical in their approach. So you might have something like, and you've probably heard these expressions, you know, we have a one-stop shop for everybody, okay? Or, you know, our expertise is better than anybody else, or our technical support is superior to everybody else, or we deliver overnight, or whatever. These are standard USPs that a lot of different organizations would use. There's just one problem with those USPs. If you say to a client, we're a one-stop shop, and that's your message, what you're forcing the client to do is think through the value of that to them. So when you say, my business is a one-stop shop, they have to work out the value of that for themselves. Here's the reality. Nobody cares enough to take the time to do that anymore. So what will happen is they'll just hear one-stop shop, same as what they heard from your competitors, and it won't even register for them. What you have to do before you ever go and talk to the client is look at all your USPs and convert them into language that it's emotionally meaningful for them. So instead of saying we're a one-stop shop, what you would say is, we bring you the convenience of everything under one roof. We save you an enormous amount of time and money because you can get it all in one place. We're a one-stop shop. So what you have to do to be more compelling in your messages to clients is you now have to interpret the information, the value in what you have to offer for them, rather than assume that they're going to work it out, because they won't. Let me give you another simple example. A lot of the clients I work with tend to be professional practices, so accountancy firms, legal firms, engineering, consultancy, that kind of situation where you've classically got experts who need to become influencers. Now, if you go to a legal firm and you ask them, you know, what's your unique selling point? What's the one thing that differentiates you from everybody else? They will typically say the same thing, which is, well, we give you access to our senior partners. Fair enough. Seems logical to them, and it is perfectly logical. But when you say that to a client, what you're asking to do is you work out the value to yourself, and that's a problem. So I was working with a client company some time ago, and they were going up for what we call a beauty parade. Now, if you've never been in a beauty parade is when you've got to go in and there are multiple companies looking for the business, and the company interviews each of those different businesses to see who stands out, who's of most value, who do they have a fit with, and who they want to engage with. So they had to go, this legal firm had to go into this beauty contest, if you will. And so most of the practices ahead of them, when they were asked, what's your unique selling point? They said exactly what I just said a minute ago. They said, we give you access to our senior partners. And they assumed that that was enough. But what they weren't doing, and this is what we all have to do, is they weren't considering it from the perspective of the client. What was the client hearing? How was the client defining value? But because the client was only hearing the same message all the time from everybody, we give you access to our clients, we give you access to our clients, that message soon became white noise. It was irrelevant. It didn't stand out until the practice I was working with came in. And they asked them, what's your unique selling point? And this is what they said, because they'd worked out in advance the value to the person they were speaking to. So what they said was, well, Mr. Client, what we can do is we're going to ensure that you make legal decisions consistently and effectively every time. So basically said, we're going to help you make smart legal decisions every time because we'll give you access to our senior partners. So what they did was they worked out the value for what the client was, which was security, to know that when he or she made a decision, it was the right one. So what they said was, they led with that. They said, we're going to make sure that you make the right legal decisions every time. And then they justified it with the logical reason, because we give you access to our senior partners. What that did was immediately impact on the client's perspective. Why? Because the message hit them initially at an emotional level. We ensure you're safe. We ensure that there's no risk for you because we give you access to our partners. And then there was the logical piece. So one of the things you need to do in order to move from being simply a sales pitcher of business to a sales advisor or an influencer is look at where your clients are understand their challenges, and interpret what you bring to them in a language that's simple and of value to them, so that you'll get their attention and they'll see you as value, and you'll be the person they want to invest or buy the product or service from. So this journey of moving from simply being an expert to being an influencer is a prime principle of modern sales. And every single one of you there can do that, because every single one of you are expert at what you do. And I am sure that by looking at it from the perspective of the client, you can interpret the value, saving time, saving money, solving the problems, or making them feel good. And if you can do that, watch how you change your messages and watch the level of interaction you get from your clients soar. So think about that message as we go through this process, because what I want to focus on is, having positioned this idea that selling is about being of service, I want to share with you some of the tools that are going to help you make that happen. So moving on from there, let's do a little poll about confidence, because confidence is a big issue around selling. So maybe what we can do, how confident do you feel when it comes to selling? So if we look at it, we can say that I feel very confident, I'm completely confident, I'm pretty good, I'm not bad, and or lastly, I'm seeking enlightenment. So you're being perfectly honest, it's a challenging space. So let's see how we're doing there. Okay, so we're getting an interesting feedback there. It's still varying a little, but I definitely think we can see that only 10% of the people on this particular webinar are feeling perfectly confident about what they do and how they do it, and that's great. Confidence is very important in selling because it has an impact on how your body language or your congruence comes across. So we're feeling pretty good, that's excellent, but there's always room for improvement. But I think the vast majority of us are feeling, yeah, not bad about it, but definitely could improve. And then some of us are being perfectly honest, and we're seeking enlightenment in that space. So let's see if I can help you with doing that particular process. So let's just close that down, and let's take a look at confidence and where it is. The first thing about confidence is this idea of trust versus high trust. So trust is a critical element in selling, but in today's world, we have to be more than just a trusted advisor. We need to become what I call a high trust advisor. Way back in 2013, I wrote a book called The High Trust Advisor, which talked about the importance of this. And what I mean by that is this: if you look at your relationships, there's actually different levels of trust in your relationships. So I think it would be fair if you think about it, that there's people that you know, there's people that you like, and there's people that you trust, but you probably don't share everything with them. So yes, you do like them, yes, you do trust them, but you don't share everything with them. And then there are other kinds of relationships. And those relationships are people that you have such a compelling level of trust with them that you have no hesitation, no reservation, no restrictions, no limitations whatsoever in putting everything you have down on the table and say, look, that's me. That's everything about me. Now, if you can build those kind of relationships with your clients, your business will soar, because you'll be the only person that they ever want to talk to. So we need to move from simply being a trusted advisor to being a highly trusted advisor and an influencer in that space. You know, to put that in more sort of colloquial terms, I was working with a bunch of forensic scientists a little while ago. And when I explained this concept to them, one of them put it very nicely. He said, so let me get this straight, he said. So trust is your neighbors that you trust to take care of your bins when you go out on holiday. I said, yeah, okay. And high trust, he said, are those neighbors you trust to take care of your kids when you go on holiday. And I said, yeah, that's a really good way of doing it. You trust them so much, you'll trust them with your most valuable possession, which are your kids. Now, in our case, we want them to trust us with their most valuable possession, which is twofold. One, their status and their brand and their profile in their business, and two, their business. And that's the difference between moving from simply a trusted relationship to a highly trusted and highly influential relationship. And that's where we want to go with that process. Now, how do we build the confidence to be able to sell? What are the elements that will help us with doing that? Well, when I coach a lot of the clients I work with, we have a model called the 6C model, which basically explains the kind of progression people need to go through in order to reach their peak level of performance. And as you can imagine, it's composed of 6 C's. The first is context, then we have clarity, then we have control, then we have confidence, then we have communication, and lastly, we have competence. So let me break that down for you in terms of how this can help you and what areas you need to focus on in order to be more confident when you're going out to talk and work with your clients, and why confidence is such a critical part of how influential you can be when you're working with your clients, and what depth and quality of relationship you can build with them when you do work with them. So the first one we're looking at is what we call the context, which is your environment that you're currently in. Now, the environment that we're forced to function in at the present time is obviously the COVID-19 environment. In 3 short months, everything has changed for us. And many of you may find that you're reacting to what's going on rather than proacting. If you like, we're out of our comfort zones. We're no longer comfortable. We're no longer feeling control of the process. We might think that the environment is now driving how we're responding to that. And typically what's happening is we're now being highly reactive rather than proactive. So we often feel we're taking 2 steps forward only to take 1 step back. And actually, even in the most normal of times, many of us often feel the same way, as we feel overwhelmed by the kind of things that we have to do just to keep the business doors open and to ensure that we're driving revenue to look after our needs. So how do we move from an environment where we are reactive to an environment where we're more proactive and more in control of the process? Well, the way we do that is we have to have clarity. This is about your focus. So if you don't have a sales strategy or a sales plan or a business plan that not only takes care of the next 3 years or the next 1 year or the next quarter or the next week, then that's going to massively impact on your ability to gain control of your process. So what clarity is all about is having a focus. So it's knowing what you want, and most importantly, knowing why it's important to you. For many of us, we can often set goals, but what we don't do is we don't go a little deeper and understand, why is that goal important to me? Why is doing that going to do something for me? So for example, you might have a goal whereby you want to improve your revenue by 100% in the next quarter. And that's not a bad goal. I mean, it's very simple. It's improve my revenue in the next quarter. But what makes that goal far more powerful is understanding why you need to get 100% in the next quarter, 110% in the next quarter. And that can be very different. For some people to say, well, I want more money. But that's not the reason. The reason is, what will the money do for you? So how will it impact on you emotionally? So will it make you feel more secure? Will it give you more control? Will it develop your financial security aspect? Will it make you feel more confident? The things that drive us are not logic. They're our values. They're our emotions. The same thing that drive our customers is what drives us. So knowing not only what you want to do with your business, but knowing what the value is in that for you is a critical element in understanding how to become significantly more confident in your business than you may be at the present time. So I would urge you that if you don't currently have a clear objective for your business over the next 3 months, 6 months, or year, to sit down today and write that down. What is it specifically that you want to do in your business? Is it about growing sales? Is it about securing how you manage the business? Is it about securing your supplier lines? What is it that you want to do that's going to significantly strengthen your business over the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or 12 months? And you may have to set more than one goal in order to cover all of the areas. Now, once you understand what you have to do, then ask yourself, why do I want to do that? And understand your clear personal reason for making that work. Why is this important to me? Now, when you know what you want, and when you know why it's important to you, So in other words, it's going to make me feel more confident. It's going to give me more security. It's going to give me the ability to grow the business in the longer term. Whatever the value is, we're now in a position to take greater control over that. Because once we know clearly what we want and why, the next stage is to break it into its smaller individual parts. So break it down to the smallest of actions that you need to do to make this happen. So what do I need to do first? What do I need to do second? What do I need to do third? And break it down into what we call something you can do when you leave the room. So that's make a phone call, draw a chart, review objections, whatever it happens to be. Break it into as small as possible parts, because now even the most global of objectives become very, very simple when they're broken into the smallest possible steps for two reasons. First of all, you're probably familiar with the concept of eating the elephant. If you want to eat an elephant, you can't do it in one go. You got to break it into its smallest possible parts and cook them and then eat them in the smallest possible way that you can. So it's all about breaking the biggest objective down into the most specific of things. And the second reason is this. Every time you take an action and that action is successful, the brain receives what we call a dopamine hit. And that dopamine hit then triggers endorphins, which are what we call the happy hormones. It's what makes you feel good. It's what you get when you smile and when you laugh or you feel gratitude. Now think about what's happening here. Imagine a scenario where every time you take an action, you're successful. The brain loves that. It then rewards you with that. I mean, an example of that is when you write a LinkedIn post or a Facebook post and you get a like. Everybody feels good. It gives you a little hit. It's been socially engineered to do that to you. But this is where you're controlling your own destiny, where you break the actions down into small enough actions, and when you take them, you accomplish them every time. Now what you're doing is setting up a track record of success. You're training the brain to be successful. So now its expectations are that you're going to be successful. And if there's one thing we know about expectations, is that our expectations drive our behaviors. So if you've been feeling less confident, less secure, anxious, concerned about the future, the first thing you need to do is set an objective, understand why it's important to you, and break it into the smallest possible doable actions. Because when you do that, now you have control over your destiny. As people say, don't try to predict the future, it's better to create it. And this process of setting an objective, understanding why it's important, and breaking it into the smallest steps is exactly how we create our futures. Now what happens? Well, imagine a scenario where you now know exactly what you want, you know why it's important to you, and you know that you control every step in the journey. And that every step you take, because it's small enough to do, is successful. What do you think happens to your confidence? It grows. In fact, it soars. In fact, when I've been working with people in coaching environments, often after the third or fourth session, you'll see a complete physiological change in them. So their body language is different. The way they speak changes because now their brain is used to success. And they project that to the people they're working with. Now, for those of you who've been involved in selling your business for any length of time, you'll understand there's one very powerful principle. People, customers, prospects do not buy from needy salespeople. If it's obvious to you that you, or to them, that you need the business, that's when they don't make decisions. And they don't make decisions if they don't have confidence in the person who's presenting the opportunity or the solution or the product to them. And they'll see it. They'll see it in your body language. They'll hear it in your tone of voice. They'll see it they'll hear it in the words that you use. Because if you don't feel in control and you don't feel confident, how you communicate that will suffer. On the other hand, if you have clarity and you have control and your confidence is strong, your communication is massively empowered and makes a much more powerful impact on the people that you're looking to sell to. What they will see is a person, a professional who's highly convincing in their arguments, highly convincing in their proposals, highly convincing in their presentations. Why? Because now you'll be what we call in communication congruent. What you're feeling is what you're projecting to the outside world, and everything and every way in which you say it, your body language, the words that you use, the tone of your voice will all be aligned to make you a much more powerful communicator. And remember, people buy from confident people, not overly confident, just assertive and confident people who are secure in of themselves and in the offering that they're bringing to the prospect or the client. Now, if our communication is that much more powerful, ultimately what that impacts on is our competence or our ability to perform at the highest possible level. And in this case, it's about how we grow our sales. So ironically, the model works best if you work it backwards. So let me just explore that for just a moment or two with you. So if you're not performing at the level that you want to in business development for your business or in selling for your practice or whatever you're marketing out there, the first thing you need to look at is how good is my communication? Am I presenting it with confidence? Am I presenting it with congruence? Am I presenting it with conviction? Or am I nervous? Am I hesitant? Are my prospects and my clients picking up on that? Because if they are, they're not going to buy. So the next stage then is, how confident do I feel? Well, if you don't feel very confident, the next question you got to ask yourself is, well, am I in control of this process? And if you don't feel in control, the next question you got to ask is, well, am I clear about what I want and why I want it? And if that isn't true for you, then the next stage is, what's going on in my environment that I need to change? So you can see the different steps that are involved, but let me assure you that if you follow those steps, you will develop a powerful, congruent, aligned, and highly influential persona that will connect with your clients both at an influential and emotional level and at a logical level, and will massively empower your ability to be able to influence and convince people to come with you rather than any of their competitors. And as a result, build that long-term client value where you save them time, save them money, solve their problems, or make them feel good and monetize that relationship. The last point on this that I want to cover off is something that's threaded through everything I've said so far, which is ultimately, what is the secret of sales influence? How do you become a compelling influencer or advisor? And the secret to that is simple. Focus on their emotions, not on their logic. Focus on their emotions, not on their logic. Look to be of service and not simply to pitch. So to explain that, I'll go back to something that we talked about in terms of the two contexts we're facing in business today. We're facing the technical context, which is about expertise and skills and logic. And then we need to start focusing more on the other context, which is about the emotional, the high trust, the influence piece, the relationship piece. And it goes beyond communicating. It goes to where we can start connecting with people, we can start influencing with people, and we can start engaging with people at a much deeper level than ever before. And that's the profound change between traditional selling and modern selling. And what we're looking to be is highly trusted advisors, highly trusted influencers, and highly engaged with the client, clearly understanding their problems and having relevant solutions in terms of how we save time, save money, solve problems, or make our clients feel good. And we work with them at an emotional level so that we hold their attention in otherwise world of mass distraction. And these are the key points that we want to keep in mind as we move forward with this. And now what I'm going to share with you are some of the tools by which we can start to connect, to influence, and engage with people. What I'd like to do now, however, before we move into that, if there's been any questions that the people would like to raise about anything that we've covered so far before we transit into the actual questioning and influencing space, I'd be happy to cover a few of those questions now if you'd like to bring them forward. So if you have a question, if you want to raise your hand, or if you want to, I think there's a piece of tech that allows you to raise your hand and we can have a look at that. And maybe Sharon might point out the person and we can have a chat about that. Just bring your question to me if you would.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, how are you, Aki? Good to see you again.
I am just unmuting you now. There you go, you're on.
Hi, Sean. That was really, really great. Thank you very much. I have a slight problem with the wording of advisor and influencer.
Yeah.
Advisor for me is always something positive or somebody positive who has the knowledge and expertise in that specific field. Influencer is for me very negative. It seems like a very negative word.
Okay. Well, let me clarify that. So I think the reason influencer has a poor word is because we're seeing a lot of YouTube influencers.
Yeah.
You get my point? So, you know, not be thinking about that kind of space. Influence, the difference between manipulation and influencing is, and which is what the traditional sales model would have been all about, this concept of manipulating people, and that's how we still perceive it, is that it was a win-lose scenario. So in other words, if I won as the salesperson, but you lost, that was okay because it was a one-time sale and I probably wouldn't see you again ever. That is not a sustainable business model, I think we'll all agree, okay? But an influencer, or you can use the word persuader, or you can use the word advisor, whichever you're comfortable with, is where we have identified their needs and we've met those needs. That's a powerfully influencing tactic, understanding what their pain is and resolving that pain. And so where that works in terms of influence or persuasion is we found a way for the client to win. And that win is on the basis that we've come to understand their problems, and on the basis of our expertise, we have suggested or indicated solutions for them. And now the client wins, and now we win because of that. Does that make sense? So we use the word influencer, you could use the word advisor. They're interchangeable in many respects. But the difference is to explain that it's not just about the technical knowledge. It's not just about your expertise, because if that's all you're focused on, you're not going to make a long-term relationship and create the highest level of value, and you'll leave a lot of money on the table in the relationship. You need to become, I suppose, you know, anybody who's ever seen the Godfather movies will be familiar with the position of the consigliere, if you will, in the process, okay? Where the person who advises the boss, that's kind of the role that the modern salesperson or business person needs to have when they're working with the client. So it's moving away from that manipulative process to an influencing and persuasive model, or a model of service. Does that help clarify that for you?
Yes, yeah, definitely it does. Yes.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
You're very welcome. Any other questions that we'd like to look at before we go forward to clarify anything I've looked at so far? Very good. We've got a quiet bunch on the presentation this morning. Anybody got a USP they'd like me to work on, for example? Any of you have a particular business message that you use that maybe you'd like me to help you hone it or develop it a little further going forward? I'd be happy to do that for you if you'd like as well. Oh, a very shy bunch. Okay, let's move forward then, shall we? So let's move forward, and we'll move to the next stage where we have another short element where we're going to talk about going into working with soft language or influencing skills. And this is where we're going to get into the kind of language that allows you to come out more as an advisor or an influencer rather than an expert, as we've had a chance to discuss with Elke on that particular point. So the first thing we need to understand in a one-to-one relationship or a one-to-many relationship with people is that the person who asks the questions is the person who controls the meeting. There has been a traditional sense, or traditional selling, a lot of what traditional salespeople used to do is try and dominate the meeting, do all the talking, present all the information, and in a sense, almost overwhelm people with their knowledge and with their expertise. So they just delivered everything at the one time. The problem with that is that you don't build rapport and you don't build trust with people if you're doing all the talking. And in fact, the reality is it doesn't even put you in a position of strength in that meeting. In modern sales, what we're looking to do is not push information to people, but bring them to us so they can share their problems, and as a result, we can suggest solutions. So we move from the simple expertise base to the advisor base. That's what we're looking to do. But there's a deeper and more fundamental reason why questions allow us to control meetings, and that's this. When I ask a question, I can control what you're thinking. Let me give you an example of what I mean. I'm going to ask you guys a question. And I want you to try as hard as you can not to do what I'm asking you to do, and notice what happens, okay? So can you imagine for me a white elephant? A lovely big white elephant standing there beside you. Can you imagine that white elephant? And when you do, notice that he's got a little red necklace around his big neck. Can you see that too? Now, don't see that white elephant with the red necklace. How many of you are seeing the white elephant? Right? Pretty much everybody, because here's why. A person cannot prevent thinking about what you ask them to think about. Now, that's a powerful principle in influence. The best way to position an idea or a feeling in another person is to ask a question or make a suggestion. If you ask a question or you make a suggestion, what happens is that person automatically has to think about what you're asking them to do. They can't block it out, they can't prevent it, and they can't stop it happening. Which means that as soon as you ask a question, you've now taken control of the attention of the individual, or indeed of a group. If you want to take control of a meeting, simply ask a question. If you make a statement, then you have a problem. Because if you state, unless it's something very clear like 2 + 2 = 4, or some very clear, non-arguable type point, then you can make a statement. But if you, for example, were sitting in the room with me and I said to you, the wall is white, and then you can come back to me by making that statement, what happens if you then say to me, well, I don't think so, I think the wall is cream? I have a problem now. Because the only response that I have is either to agree with you, oh, actually, yeah, you're right, it is, yeah. And I lose face because I have submitted to your superior knowledge, or I can argue with you about the color of the wall. And the problem with arguing with the customer or client is that you lose trust and you break rapport, neither of which are useful to us as advisors and influencers, okay? So what do? If, on the other hand, I said, what would you say if I said that wall was white? What would you say if I said that wall was white? They can come back and say it's whatever color they like. So let's say they say cream. I can say, actually, yeah, now that you mention it, it is more cream than white. So using a question or using a suggestion allows me to position an idea to see where a prospect or client is in their thinking about my proposal, without ever having to lose face or break rapport with them. So questions allow us to position ideas or to test where a client is, and allows us to control a meeting and the attention of an individual at any given time. So one of the things that you need to be, if you want to be successful in selling today, if you want to be successful in being of service to people, is to be a master of questions and what we call influential or soft language. So in the rest of the session, I'm going to focus just on that, as well as helping you overcome any and all objections that you might ever face. So let's look at the first thing here. One of the things about the way people think today, particularly dealing with multi-generational marketplaces, so millennials and Generation Zs and what have you, is that people don't respond well to directive communications. They don't respond well to being told what to do. So directness tends to equal resistance in today's world. So if you come across as the expert, as the authority, that kind of model of engagement, that kind of model of influence does not have the same level of power as it once had. So authority based on expertise is no longer what it once was. In today's world, we need to be much more subtle about our engagement. And if we're subtle, if we're influential, if we're engaging, we'll get a much higher level of compliance or agreement with our suggestions, which means we become much more powerful advisors or influencers of individual in that particular space. So the skills we're going to look at are going to help us do that. So the first thing is this. To explain what I mean by soft language or influential language, what I mean by that is that when we use these words or this terminology, it removes a high level of perceived threat between us and the client. One of the challenges we face when we're in the business of selling is that we're already operating from a negative stereotype. So people already have that traditional stereotype that they're going to be assailed by somebody or assaulted by somebody who's going to come in and try and push stuff onto them. So they might be a little nervous, might be a little anxious, might be a little unsure of how this is going to go, and they're expecting you to, overwhelm them with knowledge. But if you walk in and the first thing you do is ask a question, that changes that. Because now what you've done is you've not projected onto them, you brought them to you. And that changes the dynamic. And what it does do, and everything that we have to do in the business of selling to be successful as an advisor, is to minimize the perceived threat that is there when we meet people for the first time. And how we can do that is by using the soft language. So what soft language does is, by using soft language, it removes any perspective around judgment or perceived threat when we suggest ideas or concepts or actions to people. The first element of that is what we call forced teaming, or what psychologists call forced teaming. Now, this is a word that you all use, but you may not be aware of the power of it. And it can make the difference between an inclusive conversation between you and the client or the prospect, or an adversarial conversation. So let me give you an example of what I mean. The word is simple. It is the word we, W-E. Or a variation of that is the word us. So when we start talking about how we're going to reach this particular objective and how valuable this is going to be at the end of the day, we imply psychologically to the client that we're operating as a team. We're not in an adversarial scenario. We're not in a you and an I situation. By using the words we and us throughout the presentation, we are automatically and subconsciously giving the client the impression that we are working together on finding a solution to their challenges. When we move back to using you or I, it's when we want them to do something on the basis of our conversation. Let me give you an example of what I mean. I use a very simple phrase for this. It's we, W-E, for facilitation. So we use the words we or us when we're discussing their challenges and how we might bring solutions to meet those challenges. So we use the word we or us when we're facilitating in the conversation. And then we use the word you when we're asked to implement. So we use we when we're facilitating, we use you when we're implementation. So that means that I will go back to you when I'm asking you to do something as a result of our conversation. So let's say we've both agreed that the best way forward is for you to bring in, is for us to get another person, a technical person in on the meeting, for example, or for us to identify what exactly is the budgetary spend people have. I might say to you at that point, so when do you think you might be able to bring that person into our next meeting? Or when do you think you might be able to get that information for us? So as soon as I want the client or the prospect to do something, I go back to using the word you. Otherwise, everything's about we. So it's we for facilitation and you for implementation. So hopefully that will help you in terms of building closer rapport, getting the client to open up, and then clearly indicating to the client when they need to get involved in doing something to help us move the process forward. Now, outside of that, there are other words that you can use that can minimize the perceived threat, and they are the following words. If, suppose, maybe, perhaps, might, and would. If, suppose, maybe, perhaps, might, and would. So let me share how I would do that. So if we were to understand that, might that be something that's useful to you? Right? Or perhaps that's something we should look at now. Or maybe we might consider this. Notice the use of the force teaming. Maybe we might consider this. Perhaps if we were to look at this direction, that might help us find a solution. would this be something useful for us to look at? Suppose we looked at this, would you be comfortable with that? So you can see that by using the language of if, suppose, maybe, perhaps, might, or would, it makes it very conversational, not confrontational. And what we want to have in any relationship is a conversational relationship, not a confrontational relationship. And so using this language in your conversations helps minimize a lot of the otherwise perceived threat and the potential resistance that you would face from a potential prospect or a client who's anxious or nervous about how a conversation might go. And using these words can significantly help us move from simply dictating what's happening to where we're facilitating what's happening and moving to an influencer or advisor type scenario. Okay, so that's very much about the initial stages of how we move from being an expert to being an influencer, how we move to being an advisor in the world of sales, and how we move from traditional selling to modern selling processes. So with that said, let's get into some of the power questions that we would use within actual meetings or when influencing. And what I've identified here are a number of questions that if you learn how to use them can be tremendously helpful in any form of conversation, but most particularly in any form of sales or prospecting or business development conversation that you might want to have. So the first one, and some of you will be familiar with some of these, is what we call an open or a closed conversation. An open or a closed question, I should say. So let me start with the closed question first. A closed question is typically something like, is that something you're going to do? Or are you going to do that? And it is, or did you do that? So it's a question that gets either a yes or a no response. Did you do that? Yes or no. Is that something you're going to do? Yes or no. Are you going to do that? Yes or no. So they're only used when you want to confirm or deny a particular position with the client or with the person you're engaging with. So that's very straightforward, very simple. Open questions, on the other hand, are much more valuable to us and much more flexible. So let me share with you what those 6 open questions are. And to do this, I'm reminded of an English writer, Rudyard Kipling, which some of you might be familiar with. He wrote The Jungle Book, he wrote The Man Who Would Be King, and quite a number of books. And what he said was, I have 6 honest serving men, and they serve me true. They're called how, what, where, why, when, and who. You might like to write those down, actually. So I have 6 honest serving men, and they serve me true. Their names are how, what, why, where, when, and who. How, what, why, where, when, and who. Now, with these questions, he was able to frame questions that allowed him to gather the information that allowed him to write his books. Because these questions are called open questions. What they do is they allow the other person to speak. It encourages them to engage with us, and it prevents them simply giving us a yes or a no answer. By asking an open question, we're actually encouraging them to share a lot of information with us. And if we want to be successful advisors, the more information they give us about their challenges, the more successful we will be as advisors. And that's something to think about, okay? Now, so how, what, where, why, when, and who. Now, Mr. Kipling might make exceedingly good cakes, but he got one thing wrong. And that is one of those questions is actually a very, very dangerous question to use, in the sense that it can be seen as aggressive, it can be seen as confrontational, and therefore we need to be careful about how we use it. And that question is the question, why? If I simply go, well, why did you do that? Or why can't you make that happen? You can hear there's almost an aggressive tone to that. There's almost a confrontational tone to that. So one of the things that influencers try not to do, or advisors try not to do, is just use the question as it is. So why can't you do that? Or why can't we make this happen? So what we do is we use what's called a pre-frame. A pre-frame is simply asking a little question before we ask the why question to make it softer for people. So we can use how, what, where, when, and who without any problems. But when it comes to using the word or the question why, we need to do something like, may I ask you, why aren't you able to do that right now? Or could you tell me, why can't we do that right now? So we soften the question and prevent a break in rapport by simply saying, may I ask you why? Or could you tell me why? Or could you explain for me why? We use a little phrase or what we call a pre-frame before we use the question why. And then when we do that, it's not seen as aggressive, we don't break rapport, and we get the information that we need. So the 6 key questions again are how, what, where, may I ask why, who and when, okay? How, what, where, why, when, and who, okay? One further point about those questions. If you've used those questions in the past, you will probably get, or be aware of the fact that you probably get sort of general responses. So you might say, you know, when would you like to meet next? They would say, oh, next week or the week after. Or you might say, well, how many people need to be at the presentation? They'll probably give a general response like, oh, 2 or 3, maybe 4, I'm not sure. So using an open question, while it's helpful, doesn't always give us the particular information we're looking for. So how you make those questions very powerful indeed is by using the word on the screen, which is specifically. By using the word specifically, that question then becomes incredibly powerful indeed. So how many people specifically would need to be at the meeting? By using the word specifically, you break the person out of their trance and they go, oh, specifically, we need 2. We need the CFO and we need the CTO. And they'll give you a specific response. When specifically would you like to meet next? Oh, well, I'm free next Thursday at 10. Can we do that? So if you leave the questions open just as how, what, where, why, when, and who, and don't put the word specifically after it, you'll get a general response, which we often can't do much with. But by putting the word specifically behind that question, how specifically, when specifically, where specifically, may I ask why specifically, who specifically, what specifically, you will get the kind of information that will allow you to be a top-class advisor. You will get to the heart of what it is you're looking for them to share with you in order to help them on the journey to doing business with you. So remember those 6 key questions and remember how powerful they can become when you use the word specifically. We will revisit this again when we look at how we handle objections from clients and the types of objections that this can help you with as you go forward on the journey of being an advisor or an influencer. So that's our open questions and our closed questions. As we go through the rest of the questions, you'll see how open questions are used to frame different types of questions that do different things. Now, by the time we get to the end of this particular slide, you'll realize what a scary person I am to have a conversation with. But the key point is the more comfortable you are with questions, the more fluent and the more influential you'll be, and the more of service you'll be to your clients. So the second question we're looking for is what we call a double bind question. Now, here's an interesting thing about human psychology. If you give people 3 choices, they usually will pick the one in the middle. They won't pick the most, they won't pick the least, they'll pick the one in the middle. And that's a tactic that's worth remembering. So if you're giving 3 prices on something, give them a minimum, a medium, and a high price. Most people will tend to choose the medium price because that's how the brain works. Just pick in the middle, I don't have to make difficult decisions. If you give people more than 3 options when you're making a proposal, research shows they won't make a decision at all. What they'll do is they'll become overwhelmed by the choice, and as a result, they won't make a decision at all. They'll push back and they'll delay making any decision at all. If you want to be particularly effective, never give people more than 2 options. So when you make a proposal, never give people more than 2 options. If you do that, It gives them a clear choice between one or another. You're not overwhelming them with choice, and you're not just forcing them into a middle option. It's either one or the other. Now, how do we position that offer? Well, we position that offer by using what we call a double bind, or it's sometimes called a preferential question. Which would you prefer? So an example of this might be something like, and actually you guys use it probably every day, but you're not aware of it. The question would be something like this. Would you prefer to meet today or tomorrow? Or when suits you best to meet, today or tomorrow? So would you like the red one or would you prefer the blue one? Now, strictly speaking, it seems or appears like you're giving the client an option, and you are. You're giving them a choice. Do they want to meet today or they want to meet tomorrow? Do they want the blue one or do they want the red one? They have a choice. But the point is that you control the choice because you're the one who's put the options up there. It's a bit like the meeting, for example. Would you like to meet today or would you like to meet tomorrow? Doesn't really matter to me because once you choose one of those two options, we're meeting. You don't have control over whether we're meeting or not because once you've accepted one or the other, you've accepted the fact that we're meeting. It doesn't matter to me whether you choose the red option or the blue option. Once you choose one, I've made a sale. So this is called a double bind or preferential question. Now, the key here is to understand you'd only typically use these kind of things when you come to the end of your proposal and they've asked you to present something, or they've asked you to propose something, or you're down at the stage where they have to make a choice. And this is where you give them just two options. You've decided what the options are, and you simply ask them, would you like choice A or would choice B be a better option for you? So this is all about the psychology of managing attention. If you give them too many options, they'll be overwhelmed. So give them two, and we can control which option they respond to, which they have full control over, by simply positioning it into this double bind or preferential scenario. Would you like this or would you prefer that? That's how that question is positioned. That's how that position is framed. Okay, so on the understanding that you know how to work that particular question, let me move to the next one. Now, this is a powerful question to close a deal. So let me put you into a scenario. You have made your presentation, you've priced it out, you've given it to them, and you're at the meeting where you're going to close the business, okay? So what you do is you summarize what their challenges were, so they're aware of the pain that they had. You talk about how you've proposed to solve that pain, and then you ask the question, and the question is, how valuable would it be if we were to make a decision on this today? How valuable would it be if we were to make a decision on this today? Or how valuable would it be if we got the paperwork out of the way so we could make a start? Or how valuable would it be if I were to provide you with a sample? Or how valuable would it be if we were to run a pilot program? Or how valuable would it be if we were to discuss the commission that you'd like me to do for you? So the way the question works is you say, how valuable would it be? And then you suggest what you want them to do. By saying how valuable would it be, the person automatically comes up with their own value for taking the action. So if, for example, you say to a decision maker, look, how valuable would it be if we were to get the paperwork out of the way today? They would think, well, actually, that could be very valuable to me because then I'd know I've made the decision, I can go home with this done today. So they come up with their own value to agree to taking the action. Or if we said, well, look, how valuable would it be if we were to do a pilot program here? The value to them might be, well, okay, I can make a decision to move things forward, but I don't have to decide on the whole project just yet. That would be good for me. And then they agree to a pilot project. So it's all about the person in effect convinces themselves of the value that you're asking them to take. So close off the paperwork, do a pilot program, whatever it be. This is a very powerful question. Now, bear in mind, this is not a manipulative question. Neither is the double bind question. Because remember, we're only going to position for them the options that are best of value to them. We're only going to ask them to do the thing that's of service to them. Because remember, we're focused on influencing a win-win relationship. So these questions are not in any way manipulative. They're giving you more control, however, over how you move the journey forward and put you in charge of the process. And in many ways, that's what a client wants. When they've kind of decided that you're the person they want to work with, they now need guidance as to what happens from here. And that's where you need to become the influencer. So open and closed questions, double-minded preferential questions, and the convincer question, which is what we use if we want somebody to take an action for us. The fourth element is an answer assist question. Now, what I'll do is I'll make available, I have an ebook on advanced questioning and influencing skills, and I'll make it available to Leo to circulate to all the delegates that have attended the program today. And so you'll see a summary of these elements. So that might help with understanding this a little further, okay? So I'll have that sent on to you afterwards. So an answer assist question. Do you ever get a situation where someone says to you, I don't know? So you've said something, you've made a presentation or whatever, and they say, well, I don't know, okay? Well, what we do in that situation is, it's kind of difficult to move forward at that point. You know, they've said, I don't know, where do we go from here? Here's what we do. It's a three-step process. You might like to write it down. First of all, we affirm. So we tell them it's okay not to know. The second thing is we use the word but. The word but deletes anything that's said before it in the English language. So you're a wonderful bunch of people to talk to, but just deletes everything I just said there. So that's really important to know. That word but deletes anything you've said before. So we affirm, we delete, and we request. That's the third element. Now it sounds like a lot of work, but really it's very simple. Here's how the question is framed. So I would say, let's say I'm talking to Helena, for example, I might say, so Helena, I completely understand how you might not know the answer given the short notice that we have here. But there's the delete. If you were to know, or suppose you knew, listen to the soft language. If you were to know, or suppose you knew, what would you say? So let me give you the whole question in one go. I understand, Helena, it's not always easy to know the answer straight off. But if you were to know, I mean, just suppose you knew, what would you say or what would you do? Can you hear how conversational that is? It doesn't sound like a structured approach. But yet the impact is this. People say, I don't know to us for three reasons. One, they don't know. Fair enough. Two, in many cases, they're thinking about something, but they're afraid to share it with us. And they might be afraid to share it with us because we might act like it's a silly idea. And so they don't want to be rejected. So they don't share that with us. Now, we want to know what that is. Because the real essence between modern selling and traditional selling is co-creation, collaboration, co-ownership, co-design. The more we get our prospect or our client involved in the process of creating the solution with us that's right for their needs, the less likely they are to ever walk away, and price becomes less important. So the real difference between traditional selling and modern selling is collaboration, co-creation, and shared ownership. And that's why questions are so powerful. We want people to share what they know, what they feel, what they think, so we can work that into the solution that we create for them. And the more of that we can do, the more powerful that option will be for them, and the less likely they are to walk away, and the less important price will be. So when we ask and answer is this question, and they say, I don't know, one of the reasons is because they don't know. The second reason is because they have something they're thinking, but they don't want to share with us. We clearly need that in order to create a discussion around co-creation of a solution. And there's a third reason why people say, I don't know. They don't want to continue down that path. They have another agenda going on. Maybe they've given the business to somebody else and they don't want to tell you. So we need to find that out too. So here's how we do it. So I appreciate it's not always easy to know the answer straight off. There's the affirm, but there's the delete. If you were to know, I mean, just suppose you knew, if is a soft language, suppose a soft language, what would you say or what would you do? Now you're going to get two responses to that. The first response is where someone who had something now feels comfortable enough. Remember, we've removed the perceived threat of any negative judgment or rejection to share with us what they were thinking. If we get that, that's a success, because now what we can do is say, that's a great idea. Let's work on that and see how we can make it part of the solution. Now the client's delighted and we're delighted because we're moving along together as partners. The second answer is, I don't know. And they give you that because they genuinely don't know and they're looking for direction to move forward, or they say, I don't know, because they're trying to hide something. If you get that solution, or that answer, I should say, this is what you then say. Okay, again, I appreciate it's not always easy to have the answer straight off. May I make a suggestion? May I make a suggestion? So now what are you doing? Now what you're doing is you're giving, if they don't know an answer, you're giving them a way to move forward. And if they're genuine, that's great. Brilliant. Yeah, I'm good. I can work with that because I didn't have an answer myself, but I'm happy to work with that. But if they say, no, I don't need a suggestion, then they're hiding something else. And we got to go back into the conversation. So you could say something like, I get the feeling we're not on the same page. May I ask, what specifically is the challenge here? You hear the question? Specifically, what's the challenge? So now we're uncovering what the difficulty is for them. So that's how an answer assist question helps a person when they say, I don't know. Move the process forward, engage them in a co-creative solution to their needs, or uncover any hidden agendas that are going on in the conversation. The last question I want to share with you in this particular section is what's called an exploratory question. Now, an exploratory question is a question that comes up when, and you've probably been in the situation in meetings where someone says something to you. Maybe they blurt it out, or maybe they ask a question, and you find yourself unbalanced, no longer in control. You go, whoa, where did that come from? If that happens, this is the question that we use. We use the question, how do you mean? How do you mean? Now, that question is not grammatically correct. If we were grammatically correct, we'd say, what do you mean? But the problem with that is if you say, what do you mean to somebody, they'll say, well, what I just said, what are you, deaf? You don't get it? Okay? Which is not the response we're looking for. But what happens when we use the word how is this. If I say to somebody, well, that's interesting, how do you mean? How do you mean? It's so conversational, people don't hear it, but they react to it. And how they react is they go back into their head and they think, how do I mean? And then what they do is they'll either answer their own question, which they'd asked you, happy days, now we can continue. Or two, they'll restate what they just said, but in a simpler, more thought out way, which means we can now understand it and we can answer accordingly. But the key purpose of an how do you mean question is getting the other person to think more deeply about what they've just said, but giving us a chance to get back in control of the conversation. Now remember, questions are all about bringing people to you, influencing, connecting, engaging, because modern selling is about co-creation and service, not about dictation. And questions are the core tools of any influencer or advisor in today's world. So the exploratory question, how do you mean, is a very powerful question. It's very seldom, if ever, heard, but it's always reacted to. But remember, it's not grammatically correct. So there's some of the power questions you want to be thinking about in the business of when you're working with prospects, or if you're in the business of working with clients. And that's the issue. And they're the tools that we want. And as I said, I will ensure somehow that an ebook of mine on advanced questioning and influencing skills will be sent out to everybody who's on this call. so that you have access to it eventually. Okay, so let's just quickly check. Are there any questions on the questions? Anything anybody would like me to clarify in regard to anything I've covered in the last section? So if anybody has a question, I can deal with that now. Otherwise, we'll move on to handling objections.
Sean, I have a very quick question for you. I'm kind of going to be brave on behalf of those who are being quiet. But at what point do you decide, God, actually, this person really isn't interested and I need to walk away here before I start really annoying them? At what point do you do that?
What I'll do with is I'll deal with that in the objections, if I may, Sharon.
Perfect.
And I think it's a very important point about knowing to walk away. Here's the thing. A professional will walk away. Okay? Mm-hmm. So he or she is not going to continue to start pounding at a person who's clearly not interested in what it is you have to offer. Okay? And I'll deal with that in the next section around influence. I'll get into that space and around dealing with objections and why objections are actually a good thing. So actually what I'll do, if that's the only question, let's just move straight into that. And actually, let's just start with a poll on this. And how good are you dealing with objections? I mean, how comfortable are you with dealing with objections? And we've got, so comfortably, you can handle all objections, I can handle some objections, or I actually struggle with objections, you know, or I could be a bit better with my objections in that respect. And again, you're all very fast on the buzzer, which is great to see. And okay, that's really interesting. What we're seeing is that objections are a big area. Now, maybe some of them that you're comfortable handling, others not so much so. And maybe the idea of handling an objection is a challenge for you. So what I'll do in this section is cover why objections are something you should actually love, you should actually look for, you should actually hunt out and seek out. And the primary reason around that is what we want to be able to do is to understand that what those objections are doing is they're indicating interest. If someone is objecting to what it is you're saying, that is so much better than indifference. Indifference means I have no interest whatsoever. You're banging on a locked door. And if you keep this up, you're going to get drop kicked out of the nearest window. That's when it's time to walk away. If someone is indifferent, they have no interest in what it is you're offering them. You will pick that up in a whole variety of ways. You will get monosyllabic responses. You will see negative and closed off body language. So they might be folding their arms, they might be leaning back, you might get passive aggressive responses. This is what you'll see in the person you're speaking to. Monosyllabic answers, very low energy in the other person, addressing passive aggressive styles, and that's what you'll see. If you get that, then this is what you say. You could say, well, I'm assuming that there's probably not a lot in this operation for you at the present time. Is this something that might be of interest to you in 6 months or 9 months or 12 months? Is this something you might like to revisit? Listen to the words, might like to revisit. So the very least you should get out of somebody who's dictating indifference to you is whether it is possibly something of value to them down the line. If they say no, say thank you for your time. I appreciate you seeing me. Goodbye. Okay? Because that person's not motivated to do one of two things. They're not motivated to give you a time when they want to speak about what you have, and they're not motivated to suggest someone else you might want to talk to. They're just not motivated to do that. So do not waste your time, particularly if what you're offering is a service. Because in a service-based situation, we're trading euros for hours, pounds for hours, dollars for hours. So every minute we spend with somebody who has no interest in what we do is costing us money. So you ended like a professional, thank them for their time, and walk on. So hopefully, Sharon, that answers your question around when's the right time to be able to deal with someone, when's the right time to walk away. And by the way, when you walk away, that's a good thing. It indicates that you respect yourself. It indicates that you respect what you have to offer. It indicates that you respect the value of your service. So never be afraid to walk away if you get indifference. However, if it's an objection, that isn't indifference. That's interest. What they're really saying is, I don't see the value in what you're offering me. They haven't worked out yet how what you're offering solves their problems, saves them time, saves them money, or makes them feel good. And if that's what's happening, you automatically then need to go back into a probing environment, which is where we use our questions. Okay? So we need to go back into a probing environment where we can actually discuss with them what's the challenges they're facing. We move back into the advisor. So tell me about the challenge you're facing. What would you like to be able to do? How would you see a product like mine helping you do that? How would you see a service like mine helping you do that? How would that work best for you? So we go back to questions where we draw out rather than project with the person that we're working with. And under those circumstances, then you can start to help them identify where the value is for you. Now, here's the cool thing about objections. Every objection that you get is indicating that they're interested. They're just trying to discover the value. So every objection that you overcome is one step closer to the sale. And you're selling to a person who's had all their challenges met, who now understands the value and is fully committed to working with you, your service, and your product. That is the foundation of a long-term relationship. That is a job well done by a modern sales advisor and not a sales pitcher. The other thing about objections to bear in mind is they're never personal. You know, when we go in, a lot of people, particularly if they're not professional salespeople, take objections and take rejection on a personal basis. You know, it's often said that, more particularly for professional salespeople, that they live lives of constant rejection, interspersed by moments of blissful triumphs. So the more of those blissful triumphs that we can create, the better it is for all of us. And the way we meet that is by understanding that if someone pushes back on something that we're offering them, and I appreciate, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, as a person who owns your own business, it's hard not to take rejection personally. Because in many cases, you're offering yourself. You're offering your value, your experience, your advice, your creativity, your solutions. It is based around you as a person. I understand that it's hard not to take it personally, but believe me, it isn't. This person you're working with doesn't know you. They don't know your family. They don't know your history. They don't know your future. You're only engaging with them in a very specific context. And it's only in that context, particularly where they're not seeing value, that they're pushing back and rejecting what it is you have to offer. So never get personal. You're a professional. Think about your product or think about your service as something that's been offered to resolve a challenge. If they don't see the value, then either there's no value to add or we haven't presented well enough. It's not their issue, it's ours, okay? So it's never personal, it's not about us. The fourth element is, one of the reasons you're getting pushback is that the medium in which you're communicating with them is not their medium. And what do I mean by that? Some people are more visual than others. So they process information in pictures. So they like videos, for example, or they like graphs, or they like photographs. They like information they can process quickly, a lot of content delivered in a way that they can make decisions quickly based on those kind of information pieces, okay? Some people they're more emotionally based, or they're more analytically based. So they prefer to get information in written format. And so what I always suggest is, if you're going to make a pitch or you're going to make an offer to somebody, always present your offer in writing before you speak to them. So email it to them, give them something to read through. Here's why. Because there are certain people you're going to be trying to sell to who need to analyze information before they're comfortable talking about it. There are certain people you're going to meet who need to feel comfortable with the information before they talk to you about it. I'll give you an example of what I mean. Think back to when you had a meeting with somebody where you went in and you made your presentation. And the first thing they said to you was, let me think about that and then come back to me again. if you've ever had that experience, that's an hour of your life you could get back by simply sending information in advance. Because they were the two kinds of people I was just talking about. People who want to analyze it and understand it, people who want to get a feel for it so they're comfortable before they come and talk to you. And the fourth kind of person is a person who is predominantly verbal. So they process information in an auditory style. They read nothing, okay? But what they do want to do is talk about it. And more importantly, you allow them to talk. So a good presentation should involve mixtures of pre-sending information in advance, having good questions to allow that person to talk, and then a very short, tight communication using graphics or photographs to demonstrate the value of what you offer. If you build your presentations like that, you'll increase the number of closes that you'll get, and you'll minimize the number of objections that you get from people. And that's just something to bear in mind. The last point I want to make about objections is going back to our open questions using the word specifically. Sometimes you'll get really big objections from people. I'll give you an example of what I mean. We've always done it that way, or you've always done that, or you've never done that. Ever get that kind of thing? I can see from a few faces smiling there, you definitely do get that kind of situation. If you ever get that kind of objection, right? And we need to be a little careful with it because it may break rapport a little bit, but it needs to get called out. In other words, you need to challenge it. And here's why. Someone might say, well, Sean Weafer always does this, or Sean Weafer never does that, or Sean Weafer only does this. If you do that, or if you allow them to do that, that becomes what we call a generalization. It becomes a truth for them if it's not challenged. So if they ever ask about you or your service or your product, they'll say, well, they always do that, or they never do that, or they can't do that. So if anybody uses really big global objections like that, you now have to say, may I ask a question? Pre-frame it, keep it soft. When specifically did we not do that? Or when specifically did we do that? So what you can't work with is a global objection, always, never, forever. You need to find a specific. Now, if you get a specific, fine, I can deal with that. That's just an objection. But what you'll find most of the time is that somebody who uses that language very seldom, if ever, will have a specific event they can point to. It was a generalization. And if they say, well, I can't think of something right now, you say, well, look, with all due respect, if you can't think of something right now and we're supposed to always do it, isn't it just possible we don't always do it? But you have to challenge the objection in order to become a reality for them. Okay, just be careful because you just need to be aware that you don't want to break rapport with them. And that is how you manage objections, but why you should also love objections. Objections are not rejection. Objections are help me understand how what you do can help me on any of the 4 principles of value. Save me time, save me money, solve my problems, make me feel good. They're the elements we need to be aware of, okay? And so what I want to do, just to bring this to a close, and then we'll do a Q&A piece, is to handle probably the most predominant challenge a lot of people face, particularly if you're not a professional salesperson, is what to do when someone says no. So you've gone to all that trouble. You've qualified them. You've gotten their attention. You've gotten an opportunity to pitch what you have. You've made your pitch. You have poured your heart and soul into the presentation. And when you ask them, well, what do you think? They go, no. And everybody goes, okay. And they leave, right? I'm sorry, you deserve a better answer than that. So if someone says no to you, no is just an objection. What no is simply a cover for the real objection. And we need to find out what that real objection is. I'll guarantee you, ladies and gentlemen, if you do this, if you become fluent with this, then what happens is you will increase your close rates by 300% and 400%, because what you'll stop doing is taking no for an answer. And I'm not saying that in an aggressive way or in any way that might be confrontational. I'm simply saying you deserve an answer. So here's what you say. It is a very particular phrase. So I would recommend that you take a note of it. I would recommend that you learn it. And I recommend that you practice this exact language. So I've structured this particular language to be in a way that is powerful because it'll identify the objective, but it doesn't cause any offense or any form of confrontation. So let me give it to you first, and then I'll walk you through it. So if someone says no to me, I would say, okay, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. May I ask why specifically on this occasion you are saying no? So I appreciate, thank you very much for your answer. May I ask why specifically on this occasion you're saying no? Simple question, conversationally positioned. But let me break it down for you. First of all, we have to use the question why. So we don't want to break rapport. We don't want them to feel in any way confronted. So we pre-frame it. We say, may I ask? You're asking permission to ask the big question. Then we use the word why. But notice afterwards we say specifically. We want the exact reason why they're saying no. Notice then I say on this occasion, meaning that after we go through this, if it's still no, it's only no for now, not no forever. They may have an interest and a need to do it at some point in the future. You are saying no. Do you understand how that process works? May I ask, why specifically on this occasion are you saying no? When you position that, then you'll get the real response. And the real response tends to be, well, actually, I'm not the person who makes the final decision. If you get that answer, we did our job wrong. We didn't identify the core decision makers, but that's okay. We can work with that. What we say is, that's fine, I appreciate that. How can we, working together, now who's that person that would need to be included in the meeting? Could we get them included, or how can we get them into the next meeting? So you don't try and bypass the person you just spent a lot of time on. You've won them over. They're an ally, they're an asset, they're an advocate. We work through them to get the actual decision makers into the room. And we help deal with the objective, or the objection, I should say, that way. We don't have a budget. Now we know they don't have any money. But that shouldn't be a problem either. Because what you could say is, well, when will you have a new budget? And you could say something like, well, look, if I give you the product now, let's say it's next quarter. If I give you the product now and bill you next quarter, would that be okay? If I deliver the service now, but I bill you next month, would that be okay? In other words, help them get around their challenge. If someone says, and this is a big one, right? It's too expensive. You might say, well, compared to whom? Compared to whom, right? And if it is too expensive compared to whom, then go through your presentation and ask them, are they providing you with this? Are they providing you with this? And if they're not, you say to them, well, if I take that out, we can reduce the price. Would you be more comfortable with that? So you negotiate. You negotiate. But most importantly, what we have to do is identify why they're saying no. Just do not take no as the final answer. You are deserving of a response. And the question of that is, may I ask, why specifically on this occasion are you saying no? That's it. While we've gone through structured language sets, and it's this, and I get it if you haven't been with me all the way, this is quite a complex area, and hopefully I've simplified it enough for you to grab value out of what we've been talking about. It's all very conversational. So someone says, I don't know. I said, look, I appreciate that. I understand it's not easy to know the answer all the time, but may I ask, if you were to understand, if you were to know, how would you see that working out for us? Can you hear how that's very conversational? But it's still an answer assist question. So I don't know when we're going to meet. So could I ask when specifically would work for you? Oh, actually Tuesday next week will be good. So the questions now become a part of your conversation, your language, that turns you from simply being a pitcher and an expert into being an advisor and an influencer. And that's the journey in modern sales. It's about service. It's not about pushing. It's about being an advisor and an influencer, not just about being an expert anymore. So you should look at selling as a fundamental element. And let's be honest, If we are going to rise again, as rise we must, it will come down not to how shiny your products are, not to how wonderful your services are. It'll come down to how well you can not just communicate, but connect, involve, and influence and engage at the deepest of levels, one-on-one. Because how we rise, how we get stronger, how we restart is how we help others to do the same. So, that said, I'm happy to deal with any questions anybody would like to position for me now in the last 10 minutes of the presentation.
Brilliant, Sean. Thank you so much. A great question there from Karen. I was thinking exactly the same thing, Karen. How do you remember all this with a client?
Well, the best way to remember it is there was a lady in New York on a visit, and she was looking for Carnegie Hall, the big musical stadium. And she walked up to her road worker and she said, "Excuse me, how do I get to Carnegie Hall?" And he turned and he looked at her and he says, "Practice, lady, lots of practice." So this is about practice, guys. I've just shown you the tools, but you need to learn how to use the tools to be fluent with this. And trust me, when you become fluent, you will take your business and your authority and your assertiveness to a whole other level. Remember, it's the person who asks the questions who controls the process.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, I remember actually doing some sales training a while back, and it was so, you know, when going through step by step, it seemed so formulaic and everything. But then when I actually put it into practice, that feeling, as you talked about before, the dopamine of, oh my God, I actually did that and I got to the end. And I was quiet when I was supposed to be quiet and let the person answer rather than filling in the gaps and all that. And it was great, absolutely great. So it's definitely worth going.
There is an old salesman's prayer who said, "Oh Lord, I have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Please help me to use it in that ratio."
Yes, brilliant. Zita has a question here. When selling a product and they ask it's too expensive, how do you answer that by saying compared to whom?
Yeah. Well, if they say it's too expensive, they're obviously comparing it against one of 2 things. One, either their budget, or 2, against somebody else who's proposed a similar proposal, but obviously at a cheaper price. Okay. So what you're looking to do is, if they say it's too expensive, you could say, how specifically is it too expensive?
Yeah.
So you're looking for, because if it's too expensive, it's what I said earlier, it's like a generalization. It's not an actual answer, it's a generalization. So you can say, how specifically is it too expensive? So they, at that point, they might say, well, you know what, compared to ABC company, they're only charging blah, blah, blah. And you can say, okay, well, can we just work through that? Are they providing you with this? Are they providing you with this? And what you'll find is, you'll find a gap where you're maybe providing something more than they are. And you can say, well, I could match that if I could remove this piece, which they're not providing you with. In fact, I can do it a little cheaper if you do it, if money's your only object. But let's be clear about price. Price is very seldom a deal breaker. In the last recession, the businesses that did the most were all the high-end businesses. They never questioned price. And don't forget, price is also an element of value. If you have to deliver something too cheaply or too inexpensively that doesn't pay you to do it, that's not business you want. And the other piece is, you may very well have clients who have prevailed upon you to give them an extra special deal. And they're the ones that are paying you less, but getting more out of you, and are the first to complain if there's a problem. You don't need those kind of clients. What I'm trying to say is, just because you're in the business of selling what you do doesn't mean that it's there for everybody. Build a bit of selection in. There's nothing wrong with choosing the right price for the right offering that you give. And if they can't afford you, i.e. it's not in their budget, it's usually because they haven't perceived the reason and the value to take that on board, or they're not the kind of client that you actually want.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thanks, Sean. Another excellent question in here. I'm a dyslexia facilitator and I frequently speak to people online. A lot of them ask the price first, then the conversation ends. What should I do?
That's a good question. When somebody who lead with price, you're dealing with what is a transactional relationship, which means it's only based on price and they've no interest in anything other than that. You may as well be, you know, Kellogg's versus own brand. That's all they're interested in, right? So, but part of that is because they might be procurement people, or they're being led by their procurement people, and they're dictating that they do that. So if someone says, well, what's the price? I'll say, well, what are you looking for? What are you looking for that you don't have? So you need to position value before you talk about price.
Yeah.
I said, I can talk about price, but I can't give you a price until I first understand what your needs are.
Yeah.
Because you're not one size fits all, particularly if you're a facilitator or a service offerer. For example, if someone came to me and said, I want coaching, I'll say, well, are we looking at 5 months, 12 months? What are we looking for? What's the challenge you're addressing? Is it business development? Is it leadership? What is the issue? Or do you want training as well? Do you need the online training recorded? Do you want live training? So there's loads of things that you do, but ultimately what the value is I turn them into powerful influencers in whatever they do. Then we'll talk about the price. But if they lead with price, they're transactional. There's an argument to be made that you don't want transactional clients, because they'll always look for the cheapest price and they'll always dump you first. You want relational clients. People don't look at the price as much as they look at the value. And if they do lead with price, you find out what the value is they're looking for first, then you can have a conversation on price.
Yeah, brilliant. And a lot of that is going to come from questions and understanding specifically what their challenge is. And if they've taken the time to come online to talk to you about this, they're investing time already. There's a level of engagement there. Speaking of engagement, Niamh has a great question. When a sales lead goes quiet and they're not engaging with you, how many times do you go back to them without being annoying? Excellent.
Yeah, it's a very good question. First of all, I'd look at how have I communicated with them. Did I just leave a message? Did I email something to them? How did I engage with them? My feel on the subject is when you've sent out a presentation to them, you follow up to make sure they got it. Then you contact them one more to see if they have any questions. And then you contact them one last time to see if they're interested in pursuing the process. That might be over a 2-3 week period, right? And then you send an email saying, look, I'm not going to bother you with this. If you have any questions, please come back to me, and move on, right? So no more than 3 times, I would say, in that particular case. Follow up to see if they got it. Follow up if there's any questions. And last saying, if you've no questions, you had the information, you might let me know when you're making a decision. But obviously, I'm not going to pressurize you. Come back to when you're able to do that. And that's why it's important that we obviously have we continue to fill a pipeline. So we have a regular crew of people coming through the pipeline for us to be working and engaging with. Yeah. Like I said, I think during the presentation, people don't buy from people they perceive as desperate.
Yep.
They literally can see it in your body language, so you have to come in with a degree of assertiveness, a degree of confidence, a degree of belief in what it is you have to offer, being the best that there is available. But as I said before, in the process of the sale, the more you've gotten them involved in creating the solution by using questions, the less likely they are to push it out there and not make a decision on it, because they're invested in that solution.
Exactly. And actually, I love your point there about, walking away at a certain point, because there is a danger that you're hanging on to the past and you're sacrificing the future. So you're hanging on to this thing that you thought was a sure thing, when in actual fact, you might be letting 10 clients go that you haven't even had conversations with. So that's great advice. Right. Okay, Elke has a question here. How do you put all of this into written format if it's your first and only shot with the client is a letter? Working with architects, this is the usual way to do it. Architectural competitions, commissions, you often don't get an invitation to present and no feedback. So you've got one shot. How do you get this format into a letter? Would that be a proposal, Sean, then at that point?
Yeah, I think the letter, really what you want to do is you need to go back and look at all the problems that are consistent for all the architects that you've solved, because there'll be a common thread, right? So what you start off with, this is what I do. This is how I add value to your provision of a service to a building. So you talk about the value you add, first of all. That goes down in bullet point form, right? And then what you do is, I don't know whether you've had a phone call with them beforehand, but if you've had a phone call with them beforehand, okay, or so you've not had a phone call with them beforehand, then you can only work with general concepts. So the general concept are, what are the biggest pain points they have? Demonstrate how you solve them in bullet point form. Then what you do is you put in testimonials from other architects who have used you. So you deliver the fact that you understand their problem, then you have a solution. Then this is how you've done, and these are the people you've done it for before. And then you suggest how they need to take the process forward if they want to work with you. And that is the best that you can do in a written type scenario.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sean. Another one in here. Do you have any advice on how to implement this for building trust online? As business shifts to online methods, I'm finding that the conversation is difficult to start. Selling products online without the client knowing you and looking you in the eye is much more difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good point about everything moving to a digital scenario, which is why influencing skills become even more important indeed. Okay. So if I'm dealing with a situation where I have got a conversation with somebody, they know what the call is about. I'm assuming that they know you want to talk to them about the product service. The fact that they're giving you time, you need to acknowledge. So you say, look, thank you very much for your time. I'm going to make this very short because really it's just a research call. What I'd like to do is ask you maybe 1 or 2 questions. And if you're comfortable with that, that'll dictate the conversation that we have going forward. So set up 1 or 2 questions that position the value of what you do, demonstrate that you understand their problem. So you can say, can I ask you, how does this problem manifest itself in your industry? So ask them an open question about a problem is in the industry, and then have them talk about that. Okay, so do you ever have a challenge, for example, with not having enough time to complete your projects? Or do you ever have enough time where you don't have access to finance to ensure that you have enough people on board to do it? So you ask a question that's relevant to a solution that you can provide.
Okay,
because
so
if you do that, you indicate you understand their pain, and then you understand that there's a solution. So don't start talking about what you do first. Find out what their pain point is. Ask about that first. So tell me a little about your business. Have them talk about what they know. Have them talk about what they're comfortable with. And when you do that, they get more comfortable talking to you, because the reason that you're not building that rapport is because you're doing all the talking instead of asking. So you need to bring them to you, have them talk about their business. What are your plans for the next 12 months with COVID? How do you see that happening? What do you see as the biggest challenges for you? So come up with 2 or 3 questions that are open questions that bring people into the conversation. Begin a conversation. Allow the other person, by the way, to do most of the talking. Because the more talking they do, the more comfortable they become, because the one person in the world they are totally comfortable with is themselves, or are themselves. So the more talking they do, the more comfortable they will be, and the more they will be happy to answer your questions, the more they will open up, and the more information they will share with you, which means you're in a better position to make a presentation or proposal or suggestion to them on the back of that.
Brilliant. And it really
make decisions easy for people. Make it real small. No more than 2 options. Boom.
Perfect. And it really comes down to understanding your customers. So some people we have on the call are B2B, some people are B2C plus B2B. So it might be selling to wholesalers, for example. So just, understanding your customers first of all, and then getting those pain points and using that same language as well then when you're into the conversation, and that it all sounds like a good plan. Okay, that's great. Thanks, Sean. The last one here, how do you handle a question asking for a rounded down figure? Can you do it, as in a lower price? Well, so obviously they're just looking for a lower price. I think they're just branding it a rounded figure, but really they're looking for it for less.
Okay, well then the first thing I say, well, what does a rounded off figure look like for you?
Very good, yeah. Understand it better.
Right, so you need to find out what they're saying. What does a rounded out figure look like for you? And then you'll understand whether they're looking at rounding it down to the last penny, or whether they're looking at rounding it down by several thousand.
Yeah.
Right. And then if they say, and here's a good point actually, that, I'd be happy to help. I'd certainly look at how we can do that, but never give anything for nothing. So what you need to do is you need to be in a position whereby if I can do that for you, can you help me out by maybe making a decision on this today? Or, can you help me out by giving me 15 days credit instead of 90 days credit?
Yeah.
Always look for something in return, because this is balance. And if they want you to do something, so I'm happy to do that. How can you help me in return? There'll be a way they can help you if it helps them get a lower price. But don't just give it away. Always look for something to work with. Okay,
so actually there's clarification on that. They don't say rounded. They themselves round down the figure and ask you, can you do it for that? So they've already rounded it, and they're like, okay, right, can you do it for that?
Again, the same question applies, or the same response applies. So, well, look, if I'm able to do that for you, what can you do for me in return? And make a couple of suggestions. Will you pay me in presentation of invoice, so you don't have any cost of credit, right? Will you give me an order to proceed today, so you've got the bill and you can move on, right? If none of those things, if they're not willing to do that for you, you can say, yeah, we can do that, but we're going to have to remove this. Is that something you're happy to have taken out of the proposal?
Very good. Okay, so you're...
Or the other alternative is, well, look, we can't round it down, but what I can do for you, and you give something that adds more value, that is a low price point for you, but has a much higher perceived value, maybe the equivalent of the reduction for the client.
Brilliant, brilliant. So it's always making sure that there's a mutual benefit and value there, that you're not doing something for nothing. And it comes back to what you were talking about before, making sure that everybody sees, you know, you have belief in your product and respect for your product, and you're asking them to do the same. So yeah, that's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Would you believe we have hit 12 o'clock? Probably the two fastest and most value-packed hours. Thank you so much, Sean, on behalf of myself, because I learned loads. But absolutely on behalf of Leo Fingal, we're just so delighted to have you in to talk about this topic, particularly now as we're restarting Fingal. We just want to get into that zone of, you know what, I know what I'm doing here, I'm building the confidence to do it, and then I'm getting off to actually put it into action. And as you said, practice, practice, practice. So thank you so much to you, Sean. Thank you to all who made the time to attend. It's just lovely seeing faces. I think the element of connection now has become so much more important. Today is the first in this series. So what we decided with June, as we start to reopen, we've deemed June the Restart Fingal month. So this is a series of webinars. So next Thursday at 10 a.m., we're going to be having Damien O'Brien. He is actually a business consultant that basically covers your business from the ground up. And he's going to be talking about strategy and talking about just this whole thing of rebuilding after COVID and what we can do and building in the new world. So keep an eye on social media, keep an eye on the newsletter. And I really, really hope to see you online then. But in the meantime, thanks to all of you, and we'll see you soon. Make sure you fill out the survey that you receive afterwards, because we'd love to know what you think. We'd love to know your recommendations and any kind of other training that you're looking for. Sean, you mentioned we're going to get an ebook out.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll send an ebook to you, if that's okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
You can arrange whoever the delegates are on today's program, if you want to send that out to them. Send it with my compliment.
Yeah, and your email, sean@seanweafer.com, if anybody needs to contact you, and LinkedIn as well. Connect on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn is probably better to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, perfect, brilliant. And I think for all of us, we need to connect as much as we can. So by all means, feel free to connect with me as well. Thank you, everybody, and have a lovely second half of the week at this stage. Take care. Thank you.